Welcome to the final Holocaust Living History workshop of the academic year. As the 2024-2025 HLHW season draws to a close, we would like to express our profound gratitude to the generous individuals who made this series of public events possible. Judy Gottschalk, Julie Galper, Joel and Nancy Dimsdale, the Dunst Endowment, and our annual donors. Their support has enabled us to host both local and internationally renowned speakers this year, such as the award-winning Ukrainian poet Mariana Kianovska, prominent historian Ari Yoskovich, and second-generation survivor Rafael Pastor, who shared the unforgettable story of his father, Bela Pastor, a pioneering Hungarian Jewish filmmaker who survived in hiding. This beloved program thrives because of private philanthropic support from our community and friends. If you have enjoyed this season and believe in the power of lifelong learning and thought-provoking dialogue, I invite you to consider making a gift. Whether you choose to underwrite a lecture or contribute at any level of support, your help will ensure that our program continues to educate and inspire for years to come. Please reach out to me at any time by email to learn how your donation can make a meaningful impact. And now it is my pleasure to introduce today's lecture. Hirsch Biedermann, whom you'll hear a lot more about in a moment, born in 1925, was number 3 on Schindler's famous list. A native of Poland, he would endure years of ghettoization, imprisonment, and forced labor before being liberated. In leaving Europe after the war, he left behind not only a profoundly traumatic experience, but also a valuable coin collection his father had buried before deportation. Growing up in the United States, Hirsch's son, Mark, knew next to nothing about his father's ordeal, let alone about the hidden coins. It would take 20 years of painstaking detective work and the help of Mark's wife, Randi, our honored guest today, to unearth his family's hidden past. This talk illuminates the challenge of reconstructing a past that was long buried. Today's speaker is Randi Biederman, a native of Toronto who joins us from Canada today, a citizen historian and co-author of Schindler's Listed, The Search for My Father's Lost Gold. Randi is also a former high school science teacher. We are delighted to have you, Randi.
Thank you, Suzanne. I'm delighted to be here. I'm so grateful to you and to the University of California, San Diego to give me this opportunity to share this very personal story of my family. Anyway, as you can see, there is the book. This is what got me invited here. And back in 1984, when my husband first started trying to research his family history, we had no idea that this was going to lead to a book. Um, we had a series of amazing serendipitous things happen that led us to being able to uncover a history that we just never thought we would have been able to. So here it is. This is how it starts with the book. Um, my husband, Mark, was born in 1961 in Detroit, Michigan, the son of 2 Holocaust survivors. And here they are, my beloved um, late in-laws. And back in Poland, they were known as Hirsch and Salomea. Emigrated to the United States, and they became Harry and Sally. They were my own personal When Harry Met Sally family members. And they were unusual for Holocaust survivors in the fact that they were a love match. So many of the Holocaust survivors, after their horrible experiences, seeing all of their family killed, being wrenched from their homes, their lives being disrupted, when they finally survived and made it to these displaced persons camps, they were often such a mess that they just weren't capable of forming really strong relationships. Incredible as it seems, Harry and Sally are a love match. And somehow or other, they meet in this horrible displaced persons camp in Krakow, Poland. And they met in October 1945. By January 1946, they were married. And they were on their path to rebuilding their lives. And they worked their way west. ended up in a displaced persons camp in Linz, Austria, and then managed to make their way to the United States and ultimately to Detroit, where they set down roots, lived the rest of their lives, had their family. And Mark was born in Detroit, but grew up in Oak Park, Michigan, a heavily Jewish suburb. But he knew right away that something was different about his family. First off, both of his parents had accents, which was very unusual in the 1960s in Oak Park. The other thing that he became aware of very, very young was he didn't have any other family members. Um, he'd go to his neighbor kids' birthday parties and he'd see grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins, and there were all these people. And then when he had his birthday party, it was like mom, dad, couple of neighbor kids, and that was it. So, being the astute, bright young man that he was, he says to his parents, like, why don't I have any family? Where's my family? And they were like, oh, they were all killed during the war, which is a pretty heavy thing to drop on a 6-year-old, but that was it. And when he tried to ask any further questions, he was just shut down. It was like, nope, nope, can't talk about that. And so they were very typical Holocaust survivors in that they were not prepared to share their history, probably for a number of reasons, mainly reliving a past that just about destroyed them was not what they wanted to do. And I don't think they wanted to drop this angst on their children. So they just held it in and lived with it. And as Mark got older and he tried to ask more questions, he was usually met with the, we'll talk to you about it when you're older. When you're older and you're better able to understand, we will share with you what happened. I was like, okay, so time goes on. And this picture, which you're seeing, was in my during my late husband's bar mitzvah. So he was 13 years old. So this is 1974. And proud parents of the bar mitzvah boy. And unfortunately, less than 6 years later, Hirsch would contract pancreatic cancer and he would be dead pretty quickly. So any opportunity that Mark might have had to have learned his father's history, to have understood what happened to him, know his secrets, his history, suddenly were dashed. Hirsch was gone. That was it. Except there was one story that Hirsch did share with his young son, and it's tied to this. Mercury had dime. Okay, Mercury had dime stopped being minted in 1945. And one day, Mark and his mom went to the grocery store, and this was probably about 1970 when everybody was still paying with cash. And so they went through the cash aisle, and Mark's mom pays, and she gets some change, and she's got some coins. And Mark had been a good boy, so she gave him a few coins as his reward. And he's going through his coins. He's like, "Oh wow, Mom, look! I got a Mercury head dime. This is great. I'm all excited. I want a coin collection. I'm going to start a coin collection." She's like, "Yeah, yeah. Tell your dad when you get home." Yeah. So they get home, and Mark rushes in and he's showing his dad, "Dad, look, look, I got this cool coin. I'm going to start a coin collection." And I think there was something just about seeing his young son's enthusiasm that kind of just sparked something in Hirsch's mind. And he said, my family had a coin collection in Poland. We buried it in the backyard just before the Nazis deported us. And that was it. And for the next many years, Mark just held the thought of this Mercury head dime and the fact that his father's family had a coin collection back in Poland. I was like, wow, wonder if I could ever find it. But, life went on, and then suddenly Hirsch was dead. Mark went off to Michigan State. He got an undergrad degree in animal science, and then he stayed another 4 years at Michigan State to get a veterinary degree. And About midway through his veterinary degree, his mother called him up and said, "Look, I don't want to stay in the family home anymore. It's too big, too much trouble. I'd really like to move." And Mark said, "You're right. You should get a little condo somewhere and have less responsibility." And he said, "Don't worry. I'm going to come home and I'll help you start getting the house ready to sell." So that weekend, he shows up with some boxes and goes to his dad's nightstand and thinks, "Okay, I don't think anybody's been in this in the years since dad's died. I'm going to clean out the nightstand." And as he's cleaning out the nightstand, he's finding these photographs. And he's like, "Gee, who are these people?" And he calls his mom over. His mom, who are these people that dad's got pictures in the nightstand? She said, "Oh, that's your dad's mom and two of his sisters." And Mark was like, "Dad had sisters?" I mean, this was the level of lack of communication in this family that Mark was not even aware of the fact that his dad had had sisters. And then there were some other pictures. There's the one with Mark's dad holding the ball with one of his sisters and the three Biederman sisters. Mark had never seen these photographs. His dad had never mentioned these girls. So Mark's like, "Okay, mom, sheesh, like we got to get rid of the secrecy in the family. Sit down, talk to me. What do you know? What do you know about dad's family? What do you know about the girls?" She said, "Well, I know they were killed during the war." I was like, "Okay. What else? Do you know their names?" "No, no, I really don't know anything." And so he's trying to pull information out of his mother. And he said, "Well, what do you know? I mean, you were married to this man all these years. You don't know his sister's names? Like, what do you know?" She says, "I know his name was Hirsch Biedermann. He was from Krasno, Poland." There you go. So Mary's like, "Okay, not much to go on." But at that moment, and it was 1984, he said to himself, "Okay, I am going to make you and myself a promise. I am going to study and research and try to find out everything I can about Dad's history, his past. I need to find out about these girls. I need to light yahrzeit candles for them. And I wouldn't mind finding out about these coins." So he did quiz his mom about the coins and said, "What do you know about Dad's coins?" And she said, "I mentioned something. There were coins buried in the yard. I don't know where they're at." So Mark had very little information, and here's a modern day map of Poland. And if you look at the bottom right, circled in red is the little village of Krosno, which is where Mark's mom said his dad was from. So he said, "Okay, I got a starting point. I got Krosno, Poland. Here we go." So he presses his mom into service and has her write letters for him in Polish to send to City Hall, vital records, anywhere that he could think of where he could perhaps get some information about the Biederman family that had lived there prior to the war. And this was back in the dark days. Poland at this point in 1984 was firmly under the control of the Soviet Union. It was a Soviet satellite state. There really wasn't a free flow of information between the United States and Poland, and none of his many letters ever got answered. So he kind of, every so often, he was still in vet school, and then he went on to Colorado State to specialize in equine surgery. And so he was busy. He had a lot of stuff going on, and then he was launching a career. So he wrote, tried a few things here and there, and just didn't have a tremendous amount of success. In fact, he had no success, sadly. And then a couple of years went by, and I meet him, and he tells me this fascinating story about his father, and they buried coins, and there's pictures of these girls that he knows nothing about. And by the time I met Mark, the Iron Curtain had fallen. The Berlin Wall was down. We could travel to Poland. So I look at him and I'm like, "Have you ever been to Poland?" And he's like, "No." And, As a son of two Holocaust survivors, I have some real reluctance about going to a place where there was so much destruction of my family. And I'm like, you know what? We should go. Let's go. It's a whole different thing writing letters to some nameless bureaucrat in City Hall and having them get these and going, you show up in person, face to face, and say, "Hey, I'm doing some family research. I would love to have a birth certificate, etc., for my father." How are they going to tell you no? So, in my naivety, what did I do? I said, "Mark, we're booking a trip," and we did. Um, I travel to Poland then was still not pretty common. It's a whole different world now. In the early 1990s, it wasn't exactly a garden spot to visit. And I did have a friend who was a travel agent named Rita, and I called her. I'm like, Rita, Mark and I want to go to Poland. And her first thought was, why? Why do you want to go to Poland? God, can I send you somewhere else? I'm like, no, we're going to do family research. Mark's family's from Poland. We're going to go. We're going to do this. We're going to get all of the answers that we need. And so at that point, it was really challenging to get a flight right into Warsaw. So she had us fly Detroit to Frankfurt. We flew into Frankfurt, Germany, picked up a rental car, and drove across Germany on our route to Poland. And this was great because Mark was a World War II history buff anyway, so he was absolutely thrilled to drive to Nuremberg, see where the Nuremberg trials were, see where March Field was, where the Nazis held their big rallies. So it went really well. And then, we spent a night in Munich, and then the next day we were off to um, Austria. And we spent the night in Salzburg, and there's us, young, in love, on a beer garden patio in Salzburg. And we were both smiling away. And I love to show this picture because it was almost like the before time when we were smiling and happy and innocent. And then the next day, we crossed the border into Poland. And it was kind of really emotional crossing the border into Poland because it was the first time anyone from Mark's family had been back there since post-war. And this was our first stop. The railway siding into Auschwitz II, otherwise known as Birkenau. And this was enough to knock the smile off of anybody's face, and it did. It kind of changed the whole vibe of the trip after being at Auschwitz. By this point, Mark had managed to get enough information from his mother about her past and her history to know that she had seen these gates. Mark's mom and her mother arrived by rail car and spent some time in Auschwitz, and it wasn't pleasant. And also, Mark's mother's youngest sister, and her life was ended in Auschwitz. She was gassed as a 10-year-old child and burnt in the crematories of Auschwitz. So it was a really tough emotional experience, but one that it was important for us to see early on in our research. And then off we went to Krakow, which second largest city in Poland, which was Mark's mom's hometown. And we spent the night in Krakow, and the next morning we were just still shattered from Auschwitz. And at that point, Poland's infrastructure was not that great. So we were really concerned that we were even going to find Krosno. The roads weren't really good. The road signage was almost non-existent. So we decided to hire a driver. So Mark went to the concierge at the hotel and said, we'd like to hire somebody to take us to Krosno. And they're like, yeah, it's a very small town. And fortunately, we did hire somebody because I don't know that we'd have found it. So the whole way there, I'm sitting in the back seat, Mark's in the front with Mishkel, telling him the family history. And Mishkel's English was great. And, they're having this great conversation about family history and everything. And So Mark says, okay, Mishko, where do you suggest we start? And he's like, well, let me take you to City Hall. So we went to City Hall, and Mark and I walked into City Hall alone, and Mishko stayed behind, which I thought was a little odd because I was hoping for a translator. And Mark, in his halting Polish, is trying to explain to a woman behind a kiosk what we were looking for. And she's looking at him rather blank, steely-eyed, and she's sort of shaking her head. And then she pulls down the closed blind. And I'm like, I think we just got dissed. And so I'm like, okay, where do we go now? And so we turned around in the city hall. We saw, like I said, Mark had some halting Polish, and he saw a sign that said downstairs Vital Records Office. So we went down there, and we're kind of met with the same sort of unfriendly, uncooperative, you're getting nothing out of me. The blinds come down. And I'm like, so we go back out to the car, and it's like, okay, Mishko, like, what's going on here? Like, A, you're not coming in with us, and nobody's giving us anything. And Mishko's response was, I kind of really thought it might be this way for you guys. So first off, he said, realize we're just coming out from Soviet domination. We learned, don't say too much, don't say anything you don't have to say, don't be helpful, just keep your head down and try and survive. And I'm like, well, isn't it supposed to be their job to give us information? He said, well, here's the next thing. He said, we don't really, like, look at this town. We don't really get tourists here. The only people we see really are North Americans, Jews, coming in, trying to track down their family history. And we figure they're looking for records to reclaim property, homes, and businesses. You're probably not going to get a lot of help here. And I'm like, oh. And I was devastated because it was me and my naivety telling Mark, we should go. We're going to Poland. So I felt really bad. I'm like, okay, where do we go now? And we stopped at a few other places with, of course, the same greeting we got at City Hall. And then Mishko came up with this idea. He said, why don't we go to the Jewish cemetery? He said, there's, at least if you look at the headstones, maybe you can find a headstone with the name Biederman, and then at least you'll know that there were family members here. There were Biedermans. So he drives us to the outskirts of town, and here's the cemetery. On the top, it's the Cemetery Żydowski, which is Jewish and Polish, and there's the gates. And then below, you can see it's an overgrown, weedy mess of a cemetery with headstones kind of fallen over. And I'm like, oh my gosh, Mishko, how are we going to dig through these weeds and find anything of any substance? So we didn't. We didn't. We tried a little, and I don't know, it was just awful. And so we get back in the Mishko mobile, and we're driving back to Krakow, and it was a pretty somber drive back because the main reason we were on this trip was to get information in this town, and we got nothing. So we're back in Krakow, we're in the room, and it's like, well, Mark, where do we go from here? And our plan was then to drive back into Germany and to go to Berlin because the Wannsee Conference House, and just to give you a bit of historical background, the Wannsee Conference House was where the Nazi higher ups got together and plotted the final solution of what they were going to do with the Jews. So it was a beautiful house on an amazing property with a lake in the back, and it had this ugly connotation of being the place where the final solution was hatched. And in order to kind of wipe that away, the authorities now had taken this beautiful spot and turned it into a museum and an archive. So we went there to research and see what kind of stuff we could find. And you got to realize this is the early days. There was no internet. We were going through files, we were spinning through microfilm trying anything we could find to find some information about Mark's dad's family. And again, we were just surprisingly unsuccessful. We were finding nothing. We were at the Wadsey House able to find out significant amounts of information about Mark's mom's family, but nothing about the dad's. So a few days later, we head back to Frankfurt, turn in our rental car, and we're heading back to Detroit. It's like, well, where do we go from here? Gee, it was like this black hole of inability to find information. So we get back and go about our lives. I'm back teaching high school. Mark's back doing his veterinary thing. And then a couple of things happened in tandem that changed really everything about our research. Number one, huge, huge thing that changed everything was the internet. Mark and I signed up with AOL.com, 1995 a month, unlimited internet. It was with dial up, so we had to have a dedicated phone line to put in this cradle and hear the screeching, but it changed. Having access to the internet changed everything in our ability to get information quickly. So, hey, we had the internet. Did we immediately find anything about Dad's family? No, nothing really. It was more just here it is. We can research. There's ability to contact people and find out things that we just couldn't readily before. The next thing that happened, and I call it number one in our serendipitous events that happened. One of Mark's racehorse clients was a man named Jack Darling. He was also a World War II history buff. And Jack was watching a documentary on the making of Schindler's List, the movie. And the documentary was detailing how tough it was to make the movie and to go into these small European towns and remove all the antennas so that it looked like 1940s and what they went through trying to, get extras together to be the people of Schindler's List and make the movie. And as they were doing this documentary, they panned across the first page of the list. And he sees this name, Biederman. And he's like, oh, not a common name. It's my vet's name. And Jack knew that Mark's parents had been Holocaust survivors. So he calls Mark up and he says, I was just watching this documentary and they showed a copy of Schindler's List. And he said the name Biederman was on it. Any chance that your dad was on Schindler's List? And Mark said, well, I don't know. He never said, but he never said anything. So maybe. And we had the internet. So what does Mark do? Goes online, hears the screeching, and pulls up a copy of Schindler's List. And here it is. There's the first page of Schindler's famous list. And highlighted in yellow, there's number 3, Biederman, Hirsch, 7/9/25. Mark's dad's birthday. Mark's dad was born the 7th of September, 1925. So he's like, God, that's my dad. My dad was on Schindler's List. First off, it's serendipitous in so many ways because number one, he's right there, first page, front and center. There were 1,200 people on this list, pages and pages of names. If he'd have been buried on the 5th page, we would never have known this. There he is, number 3, front and center. So here's your dad. He's part of history. He's number 3 on the list. And the other thing that was huge was, we're in the mid 1990s, 1,200 people on this list. A lot of these folks are still alive. What a boon. So immediately, of course, Mark's online seeking out Schindler's List chat sites. Who is there? Who can I talk to? And he's putting out requests for information. Did anybody from Schindler's List know Hirsch Biedermann from Krosno? And within a week, he gets a response from this man, Alexander Bialowitz White, MD. This man uh, knew Hirsch Biederman. And he moved to the United States. He was living in Phoenix and he became a urologist. So Mark's immediately on the phone with him, like, oh God, Alex, you knew my dad. He says, yeah, I knew your dad. He says, but what's this about Krosno? He says, your dad was not from Krosno. I was like, what? No, no, no. My dad was from Krosno. That's the one thing my mother knew about my dad, other than his name, was that he was from Krosno. And he's like, no. He said, we were a couple of young lads. We were bunkmates. They had actually met before Schindler's List. They ended up on the list together, but they were in a slave labor work camp building an air base for the Nazis. And he said they worked long hours. They'd come back and they were bunkmates and they just talk about their lives, where they lived, what their lives were like, and how much they missed their home. And he said, your dad is not from Krosno. We talked. He was from Lodz. Serendipitous event number two. Okay, we'd been going to the wrong town. He was not from Krosno. He was from Lodz. And Mark was so reluctant to believe that because it was something his mom was so sure about. Now he's from Krosno. And so Alex said, Hirsch Biederman, the birthday's right. Send me a picture of your dad. So Mark had this picture. This was his dad's original passport picture when he arrived in the United States as a displaced person from the camp in Lodz, Austria. And he sent this to copy of this to Alex, and Alex said, yeah, that was my guy. We were together for years through the war, and he said he was from Lodz. So Mark's like, oh my God, my dad's from Lodz. And the good news, Lodz is a big city. Lodz is actually the third largest city. And there were 200,000 Jewish refugees put in the Lodz ghetto. In fact, there were so many Ludders that when they arrived in the United States, they put out a quarterly newsletter. And let me turn it to here we go. Here's Poland again, and there's Lodz circled in red, right in the middle of the country. Why he told people he was from Krosno? We'll never know. Maybe he just was so desperate to bury his past, but according to Alex, he was from Lodz. And so Mark presented this to his mother. He says, Mom, I just contacted this guy and he was with Dad all through the war. He said he's from Lodz. And she was like, no, he's not. And Mark had to work and I don't know that he ever fully convinced his mom that his dad was from Lodz, but he again pressed her into service and said, look, you're connected with the Holocaust community. You got to help me. Lodz was huge, lots of Jews. Ask around in the survivor community, see if anyone knew Dad. And so she's like, okay, I don't know why, but I'll humor you. So she did, and she asked around, and nobody knew him. And it's like, okay, so I mean, it's good that we know this now, but it was another dead end until, here we go, serendipitous event number three. Um, it was March of 2001. And if you know anything about Detroit winters, they can be long and brutal. And Sally just said, okay, I've had enough of this. I'm going to Florida for a month. I've got some people in Fort Lauderdale, Boca Raton. I'm going to go and stay a few days with everybody. So one afternoon, she's in Boca Raton. She's having the time of her life. It's March, it's Florida, there's sunshine. She walks into a deli, orders some food, gets a tray. She's got her pastrami and her Dr. Brown black cherry cola on the tray. And she takes her tray, turns around to find a seat, and she sees a gentleman reading a Lodger newsletter at a table. And she's like, oh, you're from Lodge. May I sit down? So she sits down, she joins him. They have lunch together and she's talking to him. And finally she says to him, my son has this idea that his dad's from Lodge, but I don't really think so. Any chance you knew Hirsch Biederman? And he looked up from his newsletter and said, yeah, I knew him. He was my next door neighbor. And there we go. We had an address. He gave the address as Zaglarska 7 in Lodz, Poland. And you wonder, how would this man remember years later his neighbor's address? He lived right next door. He lived at 9 Zaglarska. So I come home from work and Mark's like, woohoo, we're going back to Poland. I'm like, I didn't have such a wonderful time there the first time. I don't know how I feel about going back. And he said, look, I have an address. I know where my dad grew up. I've got to go back. I've got to see. And it's 2001. Um, we had the internet, but it was still kind of sketchy. No Google Earth, so we couldn't zero in on a map and see if the house still existed. And that was it with Mark. He said, I got to know. He said, there was a war, there was a Soviet takeover. Maybe there's been urban renewal. I got to go see if that house is still there. So, as soon as school was over that June, we're in a plane and we're off to Poland. And we get to Lodz, and here is Zaglarska Street. And as you can see, it doesn't look like there's been any urban renewal there. Cobblestone street, old kind of concrete, really not too appealing looking homes. And if you look on the right, there's number 7, the Biederman house. Yep, there it is. It's still standing. And here's the Biederman house, number 7, and right next door, number 9, the Alivek house from the gentleman from the deli. So we're looking at this saying, wow, this is where Mark's dad grew up, where he lived with his parents and these 3 girls that Mark knew nothing about till he was an adult. And we're looking at this yard saying, hey, those coins, are they still there? Yeah. So, a lot of thoughts went through our mind. I mean, do we knock on the door and say, hey, can we dig up your yard? But that seemed a little ill-conceived. And so this was just reconnaissance. We did this and went back home and thought about it for a while. And every so often in our daily lives, Mark would think, gee, what can we do to maybe dig up that yard? And I'm like, gosh, we could be digging forever. I mean, what are we going to get? An excavator out there? He's like, no, I need something to kind of just zero in on it. And so one day, watching a documentary, there was an Israeli journalist named Yaron Spory. And Yaron was making his name as a locator of plundered Nazi treasures that were buried across Europe. And the news journalist was asking Yaron, like, well, how do you find these things? I mean, they've been buried for years. And he said, ground penetrating radar. And Mark's like, that's it. That's what we need. I'm like, well, where are we making a ground penetrating radar? And Mark's like, I need your own foray. So Mark actually did have family in Israel that immigrated before the war. And his cousin, Arik, was at that time deputy minister of tourism. So he called up Arik and said, can you connect me with Yaron Svory? And he said, yeah, no problem. So within days, Yaron's calling Mark saying, okay, I hear you want to talk to me. What's this all about? And Mark told him the story about his family and the history and the coins. And Yaron says, oh, cool story. Yeah, he said, I'm going to be in I'm going to be in New York in August. Why don't you come and meet me there? Because I'm going to be plugging some other stuff to the Fox News team. There's a guy named Pierre Kafka who was head of Fox News at the time, and he said, I'm kind of connected with him. He's also in Israel. And we'll pitch this story and see if we can pull Fox News in on it. I was like, great, let's do it. So off we go to New York and meet Yaron for the first time and meet Pierre Kafka. And Mark's telling Pierre the story, and Pierre's looking at him, world weary, kind of nodding his head thing. And at the end of the story, Pierre looks at him and says, "So, what do you do for a living?" Mark says, "Well, I'm a veterinarian." It's like, "You doing okay?" He said, "Yeah, I'm doing great." Why? He says, "Go home, live your life, forget this." He said, "Every Holocaust survivor kid thinks there's treasure buried in the backyard." He said, "Go home, give it up. It isn't there." And I was like, "Okay." And then Pierce like, "Okay, thanks for coming. You'll be leaving now." And off we went. We were dismissed. So it was kind of a somber ride in the elevator down to the street from Pierre's office. And we get out and we're walking out to the street. I think Yaron took the next elevator down. He's chased us down the street like, "Don't worry, don't worry. I have some other ideas. We're going to try some other stuff." And so over the course of the next little while, Mark would occasionally hear from Yaron and he'd come up with his crazy ideas about, "Oh, why don't we just buy the house and excavate the yard?" And it was like, God, this is all crazy. So time went on, and April 21st, 2004, Mark gets a phone call from Yaron saying, "Hi, Mark, it's me, Yaron. I'm here with Pierre and the Fox News team, and we have just dug up your father's coins in Lodz." Yeah. Yeah, they took the information and went to Lodz and did this. And okay, I mean, the good news is he did call Mark to tell him. The bad news is he didn't give him enough warning to allow him to arrive in Poland to participate in the digging. Um, Jeroen's explanation was, "Well, we weren't really there to dig. We went there to cover the commemoration of the 60th anniversary of the liberation of the Lodz ghetto. And we just happened to meet some of the town dignitaries. We talked to town council and the mayor and said, 'Hey, we got this guy back in the States, says his family buried coins. Can we dig up a yard?' And they said, 'Dig to your heart's content.'" And so Euron said he wasn't really there for that. However, he did show up with a ground penetrating radar, so that kind of gives me a bit of concern about his honesty in this. And so here we go. Here's the news article. Son finds Holocaust survivors' treasure. Dozens of gold coins were buried in Poland. Yep. Son didn't exactly find them. He gave the information for them to be found. However, he didn't find them, and I always kind of felt bad that he got closed out of this. However, there was a serendipitous event, number four, that came out of this. Okay, you're probably going to say, "Well, they were found." Yeah, they were. And it was big because, it was kind of the last tangible thing that Mark's family had before they were shipped off to pretty much certain death. And the story that Mark's dad had shared with him as a very small child turned out to be fully accurate. So it's a really big deal. So anyway, all this commotion and kerfuffles going on, and there's, commotion and people and news crews and noise. And Yaron hands his phone to a woman journalist in Lodz named Joanna Podolska. And Joanna worked for the Lodz Gazette, and she said to Mark, this is big news. This is going right across Europe. Are you going to come to Poland?" And Mark's like, "Yeah." So I think we got this news on Tuesday. By Saturday, Mark was in Poland. And Joanna and her news crew picked him up from the train station and took him around Lodz, took him to the house where the coins were dug. They did use ground penetrating radar. They dug five different holes, digging up various things that they thought were the coins. The fifth dig was the charm, and they found a little white ceramic teapot with 63 gold and silver coins from the 17 and 1800s in this. Joanna did this article. There's Mark looking at the coins in a museum where the coins are still being held to this day. It's the Museum of Archaeology and Ethnography in Lodz. If you ever get to Lodz, Poland, go and see them. The Biederman family coins are sitting there. And was Mark hoping that they were going to release the coins to him? Absolutely, obviously. But Poland's a difficult kind of place, and they declined to release these. Yeah. And Joanna also felt really bad. So at the end of the trip, Mark spent 4 days with Joanna and her team, and they did multiple interviews, etc. And at the end, Joanna's putting Mark back on the train to Warsaw to get a flight home. And she says, "You know what, Mark? Thank you. You've been really gracious, and I've appreciated your time, your expertise, your history. And I'm sorry you don't get to keep the coins, but is there anything else that I can do for you?" Mark said, "Yeah, you know what? One of the things that was part of all of this was just to find out about the girls. Do you think you can use your journalistic skills and find out about my aunts?" She said, "I'll see what I can do." And true to her word, 6 weeks later, in the mail, these certificates arrive. Top left is a marriage certificate for Mark's paternal grandparents. And then the other three are birth certificates for Mark's aunts, Sarah, Sipra, Pasha. Talk about serendipity. I get to this point, I'm always ready to cry because it's such a big deal. This was 2004, this happened, 20 years after he first found those pictures of the girls. And here's the certificates. He has their names, he has their birth dates. And having this information afforded him the opportunity to go and do more research and find out what happened to the girls. So 20 years, found the coins, found out the girls' information. He kept his promise. And that is basically what led to the book. And at this point, I'm ready to open it up to questions and comments and see where everybody's at with this.
Thank you so much, Randy, for a gripping talk. I can see now why you were a teacher. You must have held your students spellbound.
I tried. I
I
tried.
think
I was a science teacher, so sometimes it was pretty dry. So you kind of learn techniques. I used to be bouncing molecules sometimes off the wall.
Yeah, so we have a number of comments. They're very positive about, well, from somebody who knows you, actually. I don't know if you got a chance
Oh,
to see them. Are there any questions that our audience would like to pose? If you type them in, I will be able to read them to Randy. Let me see here. Okay. Okay, I think we have a question already. Well, it's actually just thanks. What a wonderful talk and such a moving story, which you told with such hugely compelling thought and emotion. Thank you so much, all in capital letters. Well
oh,
deserved, Randy.
thank
Okay,
you.
we have a few more questions. So we have a question from one of our very loyal attendees from Halifax, Canada, Doug
Oh,
Struthers,
okay.
who apparently knows Mark. Did Mark have a sense of release or liberation with the finding of the coins?
Yeah.
The process must have tapped into a range of emotions.
Oh, yeah, it did. We spent pretty much, like I said, going through this for 20 years and every so often just getting these little tidbits that led us further on the path. I mean, it was amazing. Um, yeah, it was a huge relief, waterfall of emotion to find the coins, get these birth certificates. Yeah, I mean, there was so little he knew, and to be able to actually get this, to even be able to find a portion of what he was hoping to find was just beyond anything he was ever really hoping to do. So it was a huge deal for us.
And you put so much work into it, more
Oh,
than some professional
I know
historians.
it took over my life. Believe
I
me,
can
it was a
understand.
labor of love, and it took over my life for
It showed
years.
that it was a labor of love. So
It
Howard
truly
is
was. It
asking,
truly was. And so
I
you
think
were saying
otherwise you
the
wouldn't have
person
done
from,
it, right?
I'm sorry?
Otherwise you wouldn't have done it if it hadn't
Oh,
been a labor
no,
of love.
it was significant. It was important, you know. I mean, I love Mark endlessly. I would have done anything for him, and I did. So,
Right.
yeah, so much of what I wanted, I just backburnered because this was so important to him. And yeah, I'm still waiting to make my way to Hawaii. If you ever read the book, one of the things he mentions is that, anytime we ever had any time or money, we always ended up going back to Europe to slog through concentration camps and archives. And he
Mhm.
said, I got to take you to Hawaii one day. And I've never made it to Hawaii.
Oh,
So
you should go.
I'm
We have
hoping
some,
to.
I
you
hope
know,
so too.
I
We have
haven't made it yet, and I think it's going to be a different kind of thing going to Hawaii without Mark. So I think that's a lot of what's kept me from it is just, it's going to be I have to be in the right mind frame to go there
right, right.
without
Yep.
him.
We have
So,
several more questions now.
okay,
Howard is
let's
asking, did Spielberg's research about Schindler's List provide any information?
not specifically about Mark's dad. No. But just the fact that the list existed and the fact that Spielberg publicized it and got it out there in a movie made a huge difference because
Could imagine.
suddenly, we had these people to contact and we got a hold of Alex White who
Mhm.
knew Hirsch. So yeah, specific though, there really wasn't. I mean, no, nothing
Well, he's a
specific.
filmmaker. He's not really a historical researcher,
No,
right?
he's
So,
not.
but just seeing that list, that was
Yeah,
obviously
just
hugely
having the
important.
list
Hmm.
and it being publicized and out there was huge.
Right.
So I'm grateful. Thank you, Steven Spielberg, wherever you are. It
So
helped us.
two of our attendees are asking the same questions. Mike and let me see who else. And Jay are asking whether Mark found anything out about his aunts. Anything beyond the certificates, the
Oh,
paperwork he found.
yeah. Yeah, it's in the book. He found out that um he found out that the two elder aunts were executed and buried, like they were shot to death and buried in a mass grave. And the youngest sister, Sarah, ended up at Belzich with her dad, and she was loaded into a diesel car and executed by inhalation of diesel fumes.
I'm
So
just
I mean,
wondering
there's
what kind of an effect did discovering these terrible stories have on Mark? I mean, it's good to know, right? Usually they say it's
it's
better to know than not to know, but that's pretty awful to find out.
it was horrible. I mean, yeah, it was horrible. Did it him? Yeah, Mark carried as a child of two Holocaust survivors, Mark carried a lot of angst anyway. And finding out what happened to all of his family was just, I guess, cathartic in one way because it's like, okay, now I know, but it's agony. It just,
Right.
it's agony. I mean,
Mhm.
there's nothing at the end that you can say, okay, well, I understand, or I mean, there was no understanding of this. These were formerly happy families that were ripped apart, brutally murdered, and it left Mark's parents both very traumatized, and in turn, he grew up. Even though they didn't share the stories with him as a youngster, I think just being in the home, in the family with people having experienced that level of trauma was hard for him, very hard.
Mhm. Michael is asking something that I also wondered about. Are
Okay.
there any details about the coins, their value or importance in coin collection?
No, but I'd like, well, what we know about them, they're 63, they're silver and gold, 17, 1800s, and for the most part, they were all from the Netherlands. So part of my continuing research is trying to find out about the Biederman family and when did they work their way. Obviously, if they had coins from the Netherlands, they were in the Netherlands and worked their way to Poland.
Mhm.
So I'm still trying to do more work to find out their history because there was a huge contingent of Jews in the Netherlands that did leave for Poland, and most of them were Sephardic. So I remember thinking, gee, Mark, your family may be Sephardic, you know. So,
You have your work cut
oh,
out for you.
I have plenty of work cut out.
Yes.
Yeah, I really do.
I would like to ask two more questions,
Okay,
if you're fine with that.
sure.
Sherry submitted multiple glowing comments and also questions. One of them is, was Mark's mother alive when you found out all of this information and the coins?
Yes, she was. And I remember when when it hit that these coins were found, and she was still like, but Dad was from Krasno. How could this be happening? Like, what do I gotta do to convince you he was from lunch? Uh, yeah, no, she was still alive. But it was, she was just incredulous. Like, well, I don't understand any of this. There's these coins that maybe there's somebody else's coins.
Oh, so she did not believe to the very end
No, she
that.
didn't. I think it rocked her world. I mean, she knew two things about her husband. She knew his name and he was from Krosno. And it's like, well, you got the name right, but he was from Lodz. So it was really tough for her to wrap her mind around. He had this whole life in Lodz. And
Yeah.
there was a bit of if you know anything about Poland, there's kind of a difference in status. Lodz is considered to be kind of lower echelon. The south part of Poland, Krakow, Krosno, they're Galicianers. It's considered Galicia, and they're considered a higher rung of Poles. So I
Ah.
don't think she wanted to face the fact that, oh my God, my husband's from Lodz. He's, a ne'er-do-well.
Oh, so you just answered another question. One of our
Oh,
guests was wondering why your mother-in-law was so insistent that her husband must have been from Krasno. But that kind of makes sense now. I mean, that's a
it,
possibility, right?
but yeah, I think it's a possibility, but apparently because when we were doing further research, I remember Mark and I talking to Hirsch's friends. A lot of his friends were still alive in Detroit, and every one of them had been told that he was from Krosno.
Hmm.
They just couldn't understand this stuff about why we were going to Lodge at all when that's not where he was from. So, I mean, he'd done a very good job of just telling everybody and everybody believing that he was a native of Krosno.
Hmm. So, final question, and I know,
Okay.
Randy, you and I, we talked about this. The question is, was Hirsch involved in the safe transport of Oskar Schindler and away, to the west and away from the oncoming Red Army towards war's end?
Yes, this is something else that I found out rather recently, in fact, because I got connected to a PhD student who was doing some work through the U.S. Holocaust Museum in Washington, because I had been asking them, I'm trying to get a handle on this, and I don't know because I got my thing blurred. I don't know if you can see my if you look at the bottom of the book, and I hope everybody's going to go read the book now, right? There's something nice.
Good.
Go read the book. But at the bottom of the book, there is this picture of Mark's dad's provisional identification card for civilian internees of Mauthausen. And Mauthausen was a concentration camp just outside of Linz, Austria. And so this thing was dated, I'm trying to find the date of when it was dated. Of course, I'm not going to see it now, but um, it was dated in August of 1945. And we're thinking, what was he doing in Mauthausen? I mean, he had been in Schindler's factory. I mean, he's on the list. We got verifiable accounts of him being in Schindler's factory in Krakow and then moving when Schindler moved his factory to Brindlitz in Czechoslovakia. Hirsch went along. He was there. How did he end up from Czechoslovakia to get discharge papers or identity papers from Mauthausen in Linz, Austria? So, we will probably never be able to firmly get an answer on this. However, the PhD history student said from his research and what he saw and what he's thinking, he thinks that, yeah, that Hirsch was one of the internees that traveled with Schindler in his car heading west to turn over Schindler to the Americans. And this was a big deal because he's sitting in Czechoslovakia. The Soviets are coming. Every day they're making more and more territory and they're going to be capturing Oskar Schindler. And as a Nazi and a war profiteer, the Russians were just going to execute him. So his goal was get in the car, drive west, and turn myself into the Americans because at least that way he knew the Americans would take him into custody, but they weren't going to just kill him on the
Right.
spot. So he needed some internees to go with him to vouch with him and just be there with him. And it seems that Hirsch was one of them. And I mean, obviously, he was a trusted and much loved member of the internee crowd. If he made it to number 3 on the list, they were making sure he wasn't, you know, on the bottom of the list to get axed. He was number 3, so he was up there. So our thought is, yes, he was in the car.
Thank you so much, Randy, for
Oh,
a
you're so welcome. I'm
truly
I'm so grateful for this
wonderful
opportunity.
presentation. And the
Thank you.
comments are just really, really positive.
Do I get a
Um,
copy of them?
I think they will disappear once we close the. You should
Oh,
take a moment to read them. I don't know. Maybe there will
okay.
be. Jen would be able to tell you. I Okay. Yes, a copy will be made available to you. I just noticed a comment
Oh,
from Jen. So
I'm
yeah,
I'm
you should
reading
read
this.
them. They're
Doug
wonderful.
Struthers. It says here, oh,
That's a
racetrack. Oh,
gentleman
okay, okay. Doug Struthers. It
from
looks
Halifax.
like Doug was a standardbred guy. Okay. I'm
Well, I
just
would like
reading some of
to.
the
Yeah,
yeah.
we need to to end this event. I would like to thank everybody for attending, for raising wonderful questions, but above all, thanks to you, Randy, for telling us about your and Mark's incredible historical quest. I used
Oh,
the term citizen historian earlier, and I think it's wonderful when individuals, dedicated individuals like you and Mark, uh, spend so much time and energy on unearthing a past that would otherwise remain buried. So, thank you all for attending today's event, for interacting through questions and comments. I will finalize next year's season over the summer, and you should all receive an email sometime in September, hopefully, with our new lineup. Now I wish everybody a happy and safe summer. Thank you for being here, and good night. Thank you, Randy.
Good night. Thank you very
Bye.
much. Appreciate it.